Rakers, a science fiction action adventure. Part 6, Crucible. Chapter 51. On approach. There wouldn't be a sniper's scope for this one. Talia stared ahead at the compound as twilight swept through the valley. A short line of cars ran ahead of her, directed by suited men and women who all shared the same dead stare. She'd crashed plenty of parties in her time, and Talia recalled most staffs having at least some semblance of vitality, joking with each other, smiling as they parked her car, or took it for a joyride later. These were stone. They were professionals. JC, Talia said as Eve drove them up the driveway, when we get out of the car, I want you to stay by me, as in on my hip. Anyone asks, you're my assistant. Understand? Your assistant. Got it. Eve stayed quiet. Her part was the hardest, but at the same time, straightforward. Find the badges. Find load if possible. Get them both out of the compound. When they divvied up the duties, Talia had argued she could do the sleuthing. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Talia, Eve had replied, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've gone in and out of Nazi strongholds, Kremlin palaces, and American embassies. I can handle this. Talia didn't argue after that. They parked the SUV on a sloping hillside, crushed small brush with the tires. Not a parking lot, and there weren't many cars here. Maybe a dozen so far. Not Christopher Pline's preferred event venue then. Talia noted JC did the first step correctly. Whenever coming or going, let Talia do it first. All of tonight would be a dance with the girl, so hopefully JC had picked up some of Fade's talent. She's already gone, JC whispered as she came around the SUV. Talia followed JC's eyes. The driver's seat was empty. Eve nowhere to be seen. Which means we don't mention her till this is over, right? Right, Talia took the lead. With JC coming, they'd had to stop at a store and get her an outfit wearable to the event. Her blood-stained shirt, hidden by Eve's jacket, wouldn't fly. No dresses either. Form-fitting, no pockets. Not a good choice. So Talia had a sweater for the cool night and slacks. JC had a light jacket over a blouse. Plenty of places to keep the things they'd need later. The inventory ran through her head. Standard for her as any job got underway. What good was having a tool if you forgot it was there? No guns, not with the intense security. Tucked into the lining of her waistband, a 4-inch knife. In her pocket was a small cord that could plug her phone into a computer, allow one of a dozen programs she carried to try cracking any password locks with brute force attempts. That was it. JC had her phone and a second knife, for emergencies only. Have you ever been to something like this before? JC asked as they walked towards a tall, rounded part of the building. Security staff directed them, waving batons with lit ends, like air traffic personnel. In this line of work, if you get caught and captured, you're either ransomed, dead, or turned over to the police. Talia analyzed what she could see of the compound as they walked. 3 stories, wide and long. Not designed with the flair of a flagship campus or the comfort of a house. A block of a building, really. Not ugly in that a brick isn't ugly, only functional. Getting these people together only invites problems. Because they all hate each other? Some of them, probably. It would have been so much nicer, setting up on one of the hills overlooking this place, keeping an eye on it through a scope. There's a reason why Faye did most of the up-close and personal business. Thing is, people don't hate your dad. He's respected. Really? Don't sound so surprised. He does good work. Like kidnapping Veronica? Talia wanted to stop, but she couldn't. There were people ahead and behind them. People who would notice if they disrupted the slow funnel into the compound. You can't say that name, Talia would have added JC, but didn't. Names were risks. Never knew what could give you away. Sorry, JC looked around. Talia closed her eyes for a second, took a breath. Don't make yourself obvious. Be comfortable. Normal. I realize that's hard, but you have to try. She saw JC stiffen up, keep on walking. At least she listened. Talia had heard Fade's complaints about having a kid for years. Never wanted any herself, and Fade's experience didn't sell her on the idea. Still, someone had to have them, and she'd do everything she could to see JC out the other side of this one. They went through a wide door into what looked like the compound's real parking lot. A set of white SUVs took up the left side, familiar ones. Guess that confirmed the question of who'd run her over. In front of Talia, spreading over spaces, were rows of chairs. At the head of them, looking bored and tired, with a thick bandage over his left shoulder, sat Fade. "Don't look at him," Thalia said quickly. "Right now, he's not your father. He's nobody to you. He's barely anything to me." JC kept quiet, and Thalia noticed the girl was still staring at her dad. Walking, yes, but with eyes so deadlocked on her father that anyone catching the stare would wonder. So Thalia broke out of the line, put her hand on JC's shoulder, and stepped away from the gathering crowd. "JC, listen to me." Thalia put an edge on the words, soft but urgent. JC locked eyes with her, and Thalia could see a tear already starting to leak out of the girl's right eye. That wouldn't work. She lifted her purse, cracked it open, and took out a makeup brush. Dabbed under JC's eye, and with the tip of her finger, whisked the tear away. "Is there a problem?" A stern voice. "Security." Thalia turned and threw up a smile, held the brush. "Just a quick adjustment, that's all." "Wait till you're through the search, please," the man said, then gestured towards a series of guards doing thorough pat-downs on everyone walking in. Bins were being filled with all manner of weapons, tagged for their owners and shoved aside. Thalia had figured something like this would be here. Glad she didn't bring a bigger arsenal. "Sorry, again," JC whispered as the guard went away and they walked back into the flow. "I really thought he'd already be dead." "It's fine, but you have to focus." Thalia wanted to be kinder, gentler. More, though, she wanted to stay alive. Chapter 52. Gone. The badges were small in her hands. Cool. They felt like gemstones. Looked like a darker version of jade. All swirls of green and in gray. Ovals bordered with unadorned gold and tied to a thin golden chain. For something that could take a person to an entirely different world, they seemed too fragile. Veronica held them out like a game show model as her father led her into the room. Without Fade in it, Lode, sitting in the chair, appeared small, alone in a space too large for the cowboy to fill, especially with the man's hat still occupying the corner. "You've calmed down, I take it," Christopher said as they walked in. Behind Veronica, a guard followed, another of 0 Point's mercenaries. No gun on him, though, only a taser and a baton, ready to knock Lode unconscious if he proved as unruly as before. "Calm down," Lode lifted his head to look at Christopher. "There's nothing to be calmed. Was trying to teach your daughter a lesson. It's not respectful to take a man's hat." "Frankly, Lode, I don't care what you find respectful or not." Christopher stood right in front of the cowboy. Veronica thought about saying something, warning her father that Lode had a quick step, but she held back, watched to see what would happen. "We're here to get this done, not talk about hurt feelings." "That's where you're wrong," Lode replied. "You want something from a man, you've got two options, kindness or fear, and you don't scare me." "I don't need to." Christopher pulled his phone out of his pocket, turned it on and held the screen in front of Lode. Veronica knew what was on it, the direct feed from the garage where the people bidding on Fade's life would be gathering. "In 20 minutes, the man you need is going to be sold. If these badges aren't working for us before that time, he won't go to you." "Did you talk to your daughter, you stupid man?" Lode said. "Did you ask her where they'll take you?" "Yes, your grove. A place beyond time or some such. A place full of possibility, Lode. So take me there." "Bring me my hat." Christopher nodded to the guard, who went to the corner, fetched the hat, and placed it on Lode's head. The guard went back near Veronica. "It's not set right," the cowboy said. "Fix it." Christopher rolled his eyes, turned to the guard again. "Not him, her." Christopher hesitated, then held out his hands. "Give me the badges, Veronica, and see to the man's hat." Veronica handed the jewels over, went to Lode, knelt down and grabbed the wide brim of the hat. She worked it over Lode's scalp, felt it settle on. "There are two ways to use the badges," Lode said, as Veronica stood up. "The first is no use. You've got to be me. The second is easy." Then tell me, and Fade will be yours, Christopher said. You only need one. Lode nodded at two badges in Christopher's hands. Her father handed one back to Veronica. Now hold on to it tight. Father, Veronica started, but choked off as Lode burst up in the chair. Rushed her father. The guard moved slow. Christopher fell back, would have gone right into his own man, but as Veronica watched, her father simply vanished, popped out of existence. The guard behind froze. Lode took advantage, barreled through the space where Christopher Pline had stood and slammed into the guard, shoving the man hard against the wall. 0 Point's finest dropped the baton and collapsed to the floor, head lolling to the side. Lode, with the chair strapped to his back and standing at an angle, sat it on the ground. The legs squealed as they hit the metal plates. Now how about you come cut me loose, Lode said to Veronica. She did a quick count. The other guards were all upstairs, supervising the set of unsavory characters coming to collect on Fade's bounty. Lode himself was next to the door. He'd probably hit her if she made any move towards it. What are you going to do? Veronica said. She didn't move. Plenty of room between her and the cowboy. If he made a run at her, she could shift to the side. Her knees were bent slightly, ready to run. Get out of here. Find the man I need to kill and be done with it. What about my father? You know where he is. If I let you go, will you get him back? Lode looked over at her. Are you offering me a deal? Your freedom for my father. Veronica forced iron into her voice. This wasn't the time for trembling. This wasn't the time to be afraid. Done. Now set me loose. Veronica slipped the badge into the pocket of her jeans, then set about untying Lode from the chair. First his legs, then his arms. As soon as the cowboy was free, he stood up slow, massaged his wrists. I've been tied before, plenty of times. It never gets easier. Lode turned, grabbed the chair as Veronica stepped away, lifted it and threw it against the wall. The metal legs hit and the chair clattered to the floor, unhurt. Used to be, you'd throw a chair and it'd shatter, much more satisfying. Then the cowboy turned to Veronica, unleashed a toothy smile. Now, you know this one. Take me to my guns, darling. Chapter 53. Deals off. In front of Fade sat a man responsible for most of the South American drug movement into the city. Alexi Navarro, flanked by a pair of thugs, all in suits of the deepest black, winked at him. They treating you well? Navarro asked. Behind him, others continued to take their seats, grab drinks and bites. So far as high-stakes criminal gatherings went, this one was off to a low-key start, maybe due to the plethora of 0 Point guards scattered around the parking garage, many with very conspicuous rifles in their hands. It's been one fun minute after another, Fade replied. Leaned back in the chair. Theoretically, they'd start selling him any minute now. What would the price start at? Hopefully at least 10,000. Fade was worth that much, right? You know I'll try to buy you, Navarro continued, but I'll hold the price against future contracts. You're so generous. Most of the people in here want the same thing. Navarro laughed. You've managed to bring us all together, Fade. We want to save you so you can help us hurt each other. I'm honored. Fade caught the eyes of more groups. Not all of them were criminal enterprises. Not strictly anyway. All of them had hired Fade at one point or another, or been a target. He saw one of the gentlemen from the restaurant a few nights ago, still with a bruise on his face. Whether he'd be bidding to help or hurt, Fade wasn't sure. His new clients tended to be the victims of his old ones. Off to the side, a pair of guards were talking. Hushed tones. Fade couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the urgency. He twisted against the restraints, managed to turn his head enough so they caught him looking their way. What's wrong? Lost the host? Fade asked. We're taking our time, the guard shot back. Shouldn't you praying or something? They're already being answered, I'm sure. The guards moved away, so Fade turned back to the crowd and saw JC. No, yes, definitely her. Those eyes looking back at him with the same wide-eyed worry he'd seen for 16 years now. Next to her, was that Talia, looking alive and well? Fade wanted to yell, to shout out the questions, wanted them to run up and rescue him, for the three of them to fly away from here and never hear the words Raker, Gardner, or Christopher Pline ever again. Instead, he forced his eyes away. Noticed a new woman coming up to the stand, dressed in the same outfit as the zero-point guards, if a little more refined. "Ladies and gentlemen," the woman began, and the eyes of 50 of the most dangerous people in this city turned to stare at her. "I'm sorry for the delay. Mr. Pline has had a conflict arise, and so will not be here this evening. However, we are ready to begin the bidding process." The woman gestured to Fade. "As you know, tonight's offering is Faden Vance, a man whom many of you have come into contact with over his years operating in our city. During this time, he has made many enemies, and recently attempted to kidnap Mr. Pline's only daughter." "Succeeded in that one, actually," Fade announced, to a couple of chuckles. "Took her right out from her house, delivered her safe and sound to where she needed to go." A guard came up behind Fade and pressed a stun gun to the back of his neck. The metal tines bit into his skin. "You talk again, I'll turn this thing on," the guard muttered. The crowd, to Fade's disappointment, didn't rise up as one and come to his rescue. Apparently, client loyalty was overrated. "As I was saying," the woman began again, "you have all been issued paddles. Please raise to indicate your acceptance of a bid. The winner shall receive Faden Vance in his present condition, with no strings attached. We start the bidding at $50,000. $50,000? That wasn't so bad." Fade tried to move his neck away from the gun, but the guard kept it close. So Fade turned his eyes to the bidders instead. Watched the paddles rise and fall as the number went up. 100,000, 150. The question was, were these bids to keep Fade in business or take him out of it forever? He saw Talia hold up her paddle. 200,000. No way she had that much money. No way. The man from the restaurant stuck up his own. 250. Talia replied in kind. 300. Now hesitation. Fade knew some of these people were millionaires many times over. They could afford him if they wanted to. If, the woman pointed to Thalia, $300,000, everyone. Your last chance at this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Fade waited, watched the people in the crowd turn to look at Thalia. Most would know she was Fade's partner. Maybe that's why they were keeping their paddles down. Solidarity. It would have been sweet, except Fade knew Thalia couldn't pay that much, and they were surrounded by an awful lot of guns. Then the winner of tonight's auction, for a bid of $300,000, goes to... The woman looked down at her paper. Talia Bloom. Some scattered clapping and people were standing up, getting ready to go. Thalia and JC were in an aisle moving towards him when Fade saw the man from the restaurant, the one he'd knocked out days ago, step out in front of the crowd. He moved toward Fade with a look that Fade had seen before. A fiery glare in the iris, a glow of raging defeat. He hadn't earned what he wanted, and now he was going to get it by any means necessary. "You gonna stop him?" Fade said to the guard, still holding the stun gun to his neck, deciding whether it's worth it. But the guard pulled the weapon away, and a moment later had moved himself in front of Fade. "Back away, sir. The auction's over, and you didn't win." "Not yet," the restaurant man replied, and he lashed out, kicked the guard in the stomach. Fade saw the red spray, a boot knife. The guard staggered away, yelling for help, but nobody noticed because a series of bangs erupted from the far side of the garage. Gunfire, lots of it. A large truck backed up against exit. Its cargo door shot up, and as Fade stared, armed men and women began streaming out, spraying fire at everyone. The guy from the restaurant dove back into the chairs, looking for cover. Fade recognized the people pouring from the truck, the uniforms. Talia's uncle had started a party. Chapter 54. Crawl. JC crouched in the middle of a fireworks show. That's what it sounded like on the hard concrete. Gunshots exploded all around her, popping off in cascades. Thalia dove beside her and pulled JC to the floor. "Don't get up. You need to move. You crawl." JC could tell Thalia shouted the words, but they barely made it to her. The garage walls echoed the noise, nearly driving away every other sense, including fear. For a second, JC didn't understand. Why wasn't she terrified, frozen in panic? They weren't after her. Nobody was. This was random, deadly chaos. Whether she lived or died would only be up to her. That pushed her into the moment and kept her there. JC crawled forward, pushed her way between the chairs and around people, stupid ones still standing. Some of them, bodyguards or simply people with more tricks up their sleeves, had pulled weapons of their own from crevices not searched and were returning fire, or shooting at other people for all JC knew. What she did know was that Fade was still up there, at the front of the room, where anyone with a passing interest could stand up and shoot him. Talia disappeared behind her, lost in the shuffle, the shouting and the stamping of feet, of bodies hit with bullets. JC's hand landed in a puddle, red and sticky. She didn't think about it, kept moving. Just juice, that's all. Then a man's face, his body, falling into the aisle in front of her. His eyes wide, but JC saw them catch hers, saw them narrow, his mouth move, his hand reach out towards her. She stopped, shrank back from that hand until the man's eyes rolled up and the arm went slack. JC's mind almost went with those eyes, almost flew away, left her a gibbering panic. Except for one thing that she held on to, just as she had at their house when bullets started coming through the window. There'd been a point when, on the verge of leaving for school on her very first day, she'd panicked. Didn't want to get on the bus. All those new strange kids, waiting to make fun of her, she'd been certain. Her mom hadn't been there. Her father gone too. The bus had been late and Fade had a meeting. So he said anyway. The bus driver had come out of the cab, squatted next to JC on the sidewalk. She'd looked at the driver, a lady with exploded gray hair, and shrank back. "Know what's on that bus?" the lady said. JC had shaken her head. "A bunch of little nightmares. Bet you're scared of them, right?" JC nodded. "Why? You're one of them, too." The bus driver rose, lit a cigarette one JC noticed had already been burned halfway down. "Now get on the bus. They might be dangerous, but so was she." JC moved on, didn't touch those creepy open eyes. Past the body sat the last row of chairs, and beyond that, her dad. JC could see him now working at the restraints. He tipped the chair onto its side, giving himself a shorter profile. Always thinking, how many fights like this had her dad been in to know that? To do it on instinct? Not for the first time lately, JC wondered if she really knew Fate at all. "Dad!" JC yelled as she crossed beyond the last set of chairs. "I'm almost there!" Fade looked up at her voice, but instead of relief, all JC saw was fear in his eyes. "JC, stay back!" Her dad looked past her, and JC turned. Lurching towards her, along the front row of chairs, was a man who looked like he'd had his nose broken not long ago. Going by the red face in the shoe with a big knife coming out of it, he didn't care. JC pushed towards Fade into open space. Gunfire rattled overhead. Bullets struck the wall and broke off chips. Dust coated the air. A few more minutes of this, and people would be firing blind through a fog of burst stone. She felt a hand grab her leg, and JC whirled around. The man stared at her, boot knife raised. "His daughter?" the man said. "You're here?" JC didn't know what to say. "Leave her the hell alone!" Fade shouted behind her. "She's done nothing to you." No, she has not," the man said. JC heard every word perfectly, as though everything else outside of them had slipped outside a pair of earplugs. The only thing she could see was this guy and his busted face, the knife in his hand. That's the price you pay, Fade. You make enemies that just don't care. He raised the shoe up in his right hand, jerked JC back towards him with his left. He was a nightmare, but so was she. JC lifted her knee, pulled it up towards her stomach. With her right leg caught in the man's grip, lying on her side, she didn't have many options. But she had a good one. She kicked forward, right into the man's kneecap. His leg buckled as the man stabbed down with the knife. Without the leg for balance, the strike went right, the boot knife bending into the ground and snapping off. This time, when JC kicked, she hit the man's head. He fell back, cracking his skull against the ground. JC reached into her waistband, pulled out the knife, and curled forward. All she could see was the man, the one who'd tried to kill her. All there was left to do, as screams and shouts and shots broke the air around her, was finish the job. JC! She heard it, dim in the back of her mind, her left hand on the man's leg. One more shift and she'd drive the knife right where he'd wanted to plant his. JC, stop! She paused. Stop! Her knife was there, in her hand. One move and he could never hurt her. Come back to me, JC! Come back! JC looked back, saw her father's face, pleading with her, telling her no in more powerful language than words could ever reach. I'm coming, Dad! I'm coming! JC said suddenly. Let go of the man, clambered back to her father. Used the knife to cut the ropes. Fade, the second he was free, bore JC to the ground in a tight hug. We're gonna make it, you and me, Fade whispered to her. We're gonna get out of this together. Chapter 55. Sides and shots. Veronica paused when the sounds of gunfire came up the staircase, but Lode pushed her along. Nothing you need to care about, Lode said. Just your damn fool of a father's experiment going wrong. Seems exactly like what I should be caring about. Now it was Lode's turn to stop. Veronica, you strike me as a smart girl, someone willing to see the world for what it is, rather than what you want it to be. Hard not to when people keep taking you hostage. They're only doing that because you don't have any power. Lode pointed down the staircase towards the garage and the sound of gunshots. What do you think happens when your father doesn't come back? When he doesn't come back? Lode didn't crack a smile, didn't joke, didn't do anything to take Veronica away from what he just said. The Grove didn't seem dangerous, Veronica said. You were with me. Lode started off again. Now it was Veronica who came after him, trying to keep up. You're safe with Rakers. Without them, not so much. They were back in the hallway heading towards the storage room, as free of people as it had been in the early morning when they'd last come through. You're saying you sent my father to die? I didn't send him anywhere. Lode didn't bother stopping. He chose to go. You're dodging the question. All depends on who your daddy runs into. It's not up to me. The gardener. What would her father do when confronted with an alien creature thousands of years old? Veronica almost wanted to take a jump to the Grove then and there with Lode just to find out. The storage room proved as empty as the hallway. Among other bins, boxes, and office supplies, crammed on shelves sat, in a secure glass cage, the pair of pistols. A number of other items shared the space, keycards and the like. Lode didn't hesitate, walked right up to the glass, raised his elbow, and drove it into the seal. It splintered, and on a second strike, shattered. In a second, the cowboy would have his weapons, and Veronica would be helpless. Reach for those pistols, and I'll kill you. The words came from behind her. A woman, staring at Lode with the kind of look that Veronica hoped would never be directed at her. A frosted mix of betrayal and disappointment. Eve! Lode, by contrast, looked thrilled. About time you showed up. Eve didn't change her expression. Veronica noticed, though, that Eve's hand had pulled forward. She held a squat thing, almost like a toy gun. Veronica backed against a counter, the bins of supplies brushing against her back. Bottles shifted. Spare glassware for the labs on this level. You're the new target, Lode. You know that? Eve took a step into the room. Made sure Lode knew she had the weapon. The audience told me. Lode, for his part, wasn't bothering with the pistols. Not my fault, Eve, I swear. I've been doing nothing wrong. You shot JC. That sent Veronica for a loop. That must have been why Lode had come back that night empty-handed. She tried to shoot me first. She's a young girl. You threatened her. Now we're making excuses for them? Eve, we're Rakers. We can't get caught up in caring about people. That's not our job. Then what's the point? Eve asked. Give it up, Lode. Whatever this woman's goal was, she certainly wasn't a friend. Veronica needed Lode to get her father, needed the cowboy on her side. She reached behind her, grabbed a large vial, and flung it at Eve. It missed high, struck the door to Eve's side, and shattered. Eve flinching and covering her hair as glass rained down on her. "Now load," Veronica shouted, but the cowboy was already moving, pivoting around with the pistol in hand, squeezed off a shot. Eve fell back as the cowboy pulled the trigger, scrambled back into the hallway. "Always were a quick one, Eve," Load shouted after the woman as he grabbed his other pistol from the locker. "Knew when to run, too." "Aren't you going after her?" Veronica said as the cowboy adjusted his holsters. At Veronica's words, Load looked over at her. "Thing is, I don't take orders from you. Stay quiet, or I'll plug you as well. Odds are you're likely to become a target anyway." "Everyone in this building takes orders from me," Veronica countered. "Without my father here, I call the shots. I'll have you killed or arrested." Load raised the pistol, aimed it at Veronica's face. Squinted one eye. Fear burned, but Veronica beat it back. Being scared of the cowboy wasn't going to get her anywhere, wasn't going to get her anything. Then Load broke into a devil's smile and raised the gun away. "That's why I like you, Veronica. You stand by your talk." Then Load turned and left the room. Veronica realized she needed to breathe and let it all out. The fear, the anger, the confusion, all of it went out with the stale air in her lungs. Be like her father. Be like Ellsworth. Focus. Load had sent her father away using one of the badges. If she wanted to get Christopher from the Grove, she needed Load's other one. That was the new objective. She glanced over at the shattered case. Load was armed. She wasn't. Veronica had a target. She needed a weapon. Chapter 56. Evacuation. Thalia scrambled through the chairs to the far side of the garage. Any person she saw, she went away from. Less chance of being collateral damage, less chance of being seen as a threat. She didn't know where JC had gone, and Fade, well, going for him would just paint a target on both their backs. She found an SUV, one of those white ones 0-point favorites, so much, and pressed her back against it. Really wish she had a gun. The knife in her waistband wouldn't do much work here. Thalia did, however, have her phone. She pulled it out and punched in her uncle's number. Listened to it ring. Then, with the sounds of gunfire pouring through the speakers, her uncle answered. "You alive, Thalia? That's why I'm calling you. If this continues, I might not be." Thalia kept her eyes scanning, but the crowds had poured back into the building, away from the truck in the spray of bullets. For now, the far side of the garage where she sat was being ignored. "You weren't supposed to attack if we won the auction." "Couldn't help it, Thalia." Her uncle sounded jovial on the phone. "Most of my competition in one place? Their weapons taken away? I couldn't pass it up." "You're murdering them?" "Murder implies they're innocent, and you know that's not true. This is securing an advantage, staking a claim. You ought to be happy." Thalia leaned out from behind the SUV and looked. The rows of chairs were in disarray. Bodies were everywhere. The tables had been tipped over or torn to shreds from gunfire, and dust had filled the air, exploded from battered walls. A war zone. "Why would I be happy?" Thalia yelled into the phone. "You're killing all of our clients." "That doesn't matter anymore," her uncle replied. "You won't have to worry about that. You're a monster." "I'm a businessman." Her uncle paused, spoke to someone else. "Sorry, Thalia. Have to go. Things are getting interesting out here." The phone clicked off and Thalia collapsed back against the SUV. At least the bullets weren't flying in the garage anymore. Everyone had either fled or been incapacitated. Her uncle's forces were climbing into the truck, its engine replacing the gunfire with a gasoline growl, which meant she could go hunting for Fade. Keeping low, Thalia crawled across the concrete, back towards the chairs, under the hazy cloud of dust. Her nose stung, her lungs hurt, breathing in all kinds of terrible things. Thalia's eyes started to water as the air thickened, and she blinked constantly, until a hand landed on her back. "Hey, Thalia, hold up." Fade, with JC crouched behind him. "You know what's going on?" "We've got to get out of here. That's what's going on," Thalia replied. "The exit looks a little dangerous." The truck had pulled away, but outside, scattered gunfire still echoed. Booms from heavier things. Flickering lights suggested something had caught fire. If the police weren't already here, they would be soon. Then inside, Talia said. Follow me. Fade didn't argue, and they were off on a quick walk, keeping their heads down, towards the other end of the garage. On the way, they passed a table loaded up with guns taken from attendees. Talia took the opportunity to grab a set, held out a handgun to Fade, who shook his head. Even now? With your daughter? Talia said. Even now. What are you talking about? JC asked them. Don't worry about it, Fade told her. Let's go, Talia. They went through the door into the base level of Pline's compound. Talia had expected to see more people in a panic, but the hallway stood, aside from a person vanishing around the far corner, empty. There must be other exits here. Where's Eve? Fade said. Hunting load, Talia replied. Figure we'd let them have it out. They made it to the central staircase. From above them, they heard the cracking report of a pistol. Only one guy uses a gun like that, Fade said, looking up the stairs. I'm going to go up. Talia, get JC out of here. I can go instead. She's your daughter. I think I can make it alone, JC ventured. No, Thalia and Fade said simultaneously, then glanced at each other. He shot JC, Thalia. I can't forgive that. You and your revenge, Thalia rolled her eyes, then turned to JC. Come on, let's find the way out. Then we'll tell your crazy dad how to do the same. JC didn't argue, and the two of them left Fade there at the foot of the staircase. They'd come here to rescue him, and now they were leaving him behind. When did the world go so utterly insane? Chapter 57. Slip away. Fade jumped the steps 2 at a time. Around the bend in the stairway, a curling one representing a helix? Fade didn't have time to confirm the impression, because he hit the landing in time to see Eve, lightning flash out and pointed, take a bullet in the side. She spun down to the ground, the shot's force twisting her as she fell. The lightning flash flew from her grasp and bounced along the hallway behind her. Then Lode aimed his pistols at Fade, cocked his head to one side. See, you made it through the show, the cowboy said. Guess I'm a lucky guy. Get my guns and my target one after the other. Glad to see your feelings haven't changed, Fade replied. Hate to stop hating you. The cowboy grinned and pulled the triggers. Fade, as soon as he saw Lode's mouth quirk up, dropped into a low crouch. The bullets whisked over his head and Fade pushed off, leaping forward. He caught the ground with his hands, saw Lode lowering the pistols, and rolled. Curled in his body as Fade turned over, and then extended as he came out of the roll. Fade's feet rammed Lode's legs as the pistols went off again. This time striking the ground around Fade's head, sending bits of carpet and the underlying stone into his face. Fade ignored it. Eyes on the prize, the cowboy, tangled in Fade's legs, tried to bring the pistols to bear. Fade, though, kept moving with the roll, sitting up and grabbing Lode's hot guns with his hands. He winced at the pain, but a bit of burning was worth enduring to survive. He shoved the barrels up, and when Fade came close enough to Lode's angry snarl, he snapped his forehead into Lode's nose. Felt it crack. Lode struggled, and Fade felt those barrels start to turn. One clear shot and Grove nanobots stitching him up, or no, Fade figured he'd be dead. So he dropped the barrels, let Lode overcorrect, and Fade pulled himself away. Lode, guns now aiming where Fade used to be, whipped them to his right, down the hallway where Fade had shifted, which put both pistols in a convenient line. Fade ducked and went for another tackle, expecting the bullets to fly where his face had been. Like before, except Lode didn't shoot. Fade, though, had committed, went into a straight uppercut. Lode's pistol hit his head like a hammer, coming straight down and knocking Fade to the ground, his head spinning. Fade saw the cowboy take a step back, raise his pistols. Fade pushed off his arms and rolled to the left. Again, though, Lode held his fire. You're a squirmy one, the cowboy said, his voice picking up a nasally quality given his busted nose. Accept it. You're done. Do what they do in the movies. Die like a man. Like me? Eve's voice was weak, slight, but burned with a heat Fade would have been scared to receive. He turned, rose to his feet to see Eve trip Lode from behind, sweeping her leg through the cowboys. Her own outfit ran red, and the floor told the dark truth of her wound. Lode didn't take the fall easy. Hit hard on his back, tried to turn over, and Eve snapped another kick, whacking Lode's left arm as he rolled and knocking one of his pistols away. Lode, though, snaked out his own right hand and scooped Eve off her feet. She went to Lode's level, but unlike the cowboy, didn't seem to have the energy to move. "Now you get in a fight? So many years telling me to keep my gun away, and you go all out against me?" Lode sounded legitimately hurt. He stood just in time for Fade to wrap an elbow around the cowboy's neck, brace, and throw Lode down. Before the cowboy had a chance to move, Fade grabbed the other pistol and threw it away down the stairwell. "No more guns, Lode." Fade backed off from the cowboy, gave him a chance to get to his feet. "You and me, hands and feet." Outside, the sound of gunfire had trickled away. Sirens replaced it. Flashing lights came through the windows on the other side of the building. Reds and blues. Lode noticed too. Stretched his arms out. "Fine, the cowboy said. "Let's go, Pops." Fade stayed light on his heels as Lode approached, the cowboy putting his left fist out in front of his right, like he was walking into a brawl. Fade waited till Lode closed to within a yard, and just as the cowboy stepped forward, Fade darted inside Lode's reach, delivered 3 quick strikes to Lode's abdomen, and finishing with a knee to the man's stomach. Lode backpedaled, and Fade used the space to plant his right foot and whirl into a kick. Smashed Lode's side and knocked the cowboy down the stairs. Fade followed the fall, jumped from the first step and hit Lode as he tried to stand up on the landing. Pushed Lode into the railing, and Fade flew into a flurry. Let the emotions run through his fists into Lode, every punch a partial payback for JC. "Lay off him." The words came from behind Fade, but he knew the voice. "You don't want to save him," Fade said to Veronica, without looking away from Lode's broken face. "He'll hurt you." "I know he will," Veronica said, "but I need him." "She needs me," Lode sputtered. Or was that a laugh? "See that, Fade? You're not the only one people want around here." "Throw me the badge, Lode," Veronica shouted. "Throw it to me and you live. Don't, and I let Fade do what he wants." Lode reached inside his jacket, pulled out the green jewel, and threw it up the stairs. Fade watched it fly, saw it land at Veronica's feet. She kept her hands on the large shotgun. One, Fade noticed, had the initials CP engraved into the stock. Where was her father anyway? "I knew there was a bit of sense left in you," Veronica said. "Fade, your friend up here looks really bad. You might want to help her out." Fade looked between Veronica and the cowboy. What he wanted, what Fade wished he could do more than anything in that moment, was push Lode over the railing, erase his existence. But there would be time for that later. So he backed away from the cowboy, who slumped against the railing, and then went up the stairs. Past Veronica, who stuffed the badge in a pocket and kept her shotgun trained on Fade. Eve lay sprawled on the carpet, her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. Fade wasn't a doctor, didn't have medical supplies, but there was one thing he could do, one way he could help her. Fade reached down and pulled the badge up from its careful place around Eve's neck. He guided Eve's hand to the stone, kept his own around hers. He wanted to save Eve, yes, but getting himself out of a police raid wouldn't be the world's worst side benefit. "Go," Fade whispered. "Take us to the Grove." Eve didn't say anything, but Fade felt her stir and saw the compound fall away. Chapter 58. The shock. After leaving Fade at the foot of the stairwell, JC ran with Talia toward the back of the building. They didn't know where an exit was, but they were able to follow the sounds of stamping feet and shouts for others to catch up. Soon enough, beyond a series of offices and small rooms with clean counters and strange machinery, they found double doors with a red exit sign above. A path leading back around the building, towards the front where the cars are parked, sat outside. The gunfire had stopped, leaving an empty hole where cacophony had reigned before. JC, a cavalcade of flashing lights around the building's corner. Reds and blues, The police had arrived and broken up the show. Should we try to run? JC asked Thalia. We have to get to my car and then speed around them. I don't think that's going to work. Better to play the victim. You don't think we'll get arrested? Neither one of us brought a gun, Thalia said. Neither one of us hurt anybody. We're not a part of any of these groups. We'll have to do some fancy arguing, but we can make it. They followed other plant employees to the front of the compound. There, arrayed like a phalanx, were a dozen police cars, a SWAT van, and equally as many ambulances. Bodies were being loaded, and the wounded were getting stitched up and thrown into the back of the emergency vehicles, which proceeded to speed away and then return back, like bees coming and going from a hive. In the cool night air under the moonlight, JC would have found the whole thing hypnotizing if she hadn't been terrified. Her father was still nowhere to be seen. She'd barely survived another deadly incident in less than 2 days' time. Whatever her life was turning into, it didn't seem like she'd be able to live much longer. Her luck would have to run out, right? Just stay calm, Thalia said as they came up to the first pair of officers standing guard over the parking lot, over the few cars that remained. Let me do the talking. And talk Thalia did. The officers came at them question after question, searched them both, didn't find the knives, thankfully, took down Thalia's name, JC's number, and then waved them through. That wasn't that difficult, JC said, sitting shotgun. They must have most of the suspects already, Thalia said. The ones that they can pin a crime on, anyway. What about Fade, Eve? Do we wait for them here? Thalia leaned back in her seat. We can give them a few minutes. Any longer, and we'll attract the wrong kind of attention. You think he's okay? Should we have stayed? Fade's smart guy, a heck of a fighter. He stands as good a chance at getting out of there as anybody. JC stared out the window back at the compound, watched the stragglers leaving the building, the garage. Her father wasn't one of them. His face didn't appear. Wherever Fade was, he wasn't with her. After 5 minutes, Thalia sighed, reached forward and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. Can we wait longer? JC, at this point, either your father has been arrested or killed, or he's gone back with Eve to the Grove. You're so comforting, JC replied. Killed. What if Fade had gone up there and been murdered while JC ran away? Say, you couldn't have done anything, Thalia said as if sensing what JC was thinking about. You already helped him enough. You give Fade a chance. Don't ruin that. But as Thalia drove out of the compound, past the police blockade and the waving hands of officers, JC could only wonder if she left her father behind when he needed her most. Chapter 59. News story. Veronica kept the shotgun leveled at the cowboy, ignored his disarming grin. She had the badge now, which was what mattered. Veronica, Lode said, swagger dripping into his voice. You got what you wanted. Then you let the little rat escape. So let's talk. What do you want? I want you to show me how to use the badge, Veronica said. Already told you, Lode replied. The badge goes 2 ways. Either you gotta be on the edge of your life, or you have to be a raker. And you're not either one, so it's not going to do anything for you. Below in the stairwell, Veronica heard the sounds of police approaching, breaking into rooms and confirming whether people were there. If she wanted to leave, it would have to be soon. Lode heard the noises too, nodded down the stairs. Come on, we don't have much time. You've got some way out of here? The cowboy asked. Whether I do or not, it doesn't matter, Veronica said. The only thing you need to worry about is whether I'm going to let you come with me. And how do you expect to get your father back without my help? You assume I want him back. Veronica retreated to step. It felt strange say the words out loud, but she felt that. She knew it was true. Christopher Pline had never shown her anything more than contempt, treated her as anything other than a burden, a mold to be formed into a useful likeness. In their very last conversation, her own father had threatened that Veronica's life would be gone. Now she had a chance to get it back. The cost was high, but it was her life. Who doesn't want their daddy back? Lode said. Veronica picked up the note of worry in his voice. Below, the police entered the stairwell. Time was running out. I'll have to think about it, Veronica said. In the meantime, you could probably use a few years in a cell. Load shook his head. If you think I'm going to prison, you got it wrong. Give me that badge. The cowboy ran forward, setting his shoulder in a charge towards Veronica. She pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared, blasted into Lode's shoulder, and sent the cowboy flying away from her. And then Veronica ran, turned away from the stairwell toward the side of the building, up a back stair to the third and then fourth floor, into her father's office, slipped the shotgun into a safe, sat down in her father's chair, and waited. When the police came, she told them the story. Her father gone mad with power, a strange cowboy hired and who, with a vengeance, conspired to bring together hated groups, who incited a fight and caused uncountable damage. Veronica, of course, had stayed out of it. Locked up in her father's office until the trouble stopped. As for where her father was, she had no idea. And that was all that was asked before the lawyers came, before all of her father's considerable resources entered the play on her behalf. Assistants and attorneys wading in to clear her name. Around her neck, the entire time, hung a glittering green jewel bordered with gold. Chapter 60. Recruited. 1 hour. That's how long Fade estimated it took Eve to turn back from the dying edge of pale to a more normal hue. They sat in the silvery room in the tower where the badge had taken them. Sat while Eve slept, and Fade worried about his daughter. Eventually, though, Eva's eyes opened. She took a long, deep breath. "How do you feel?" Fade asked. "I've come back from the brink of death so many times now," Eve said. "I don't even know anymore what it would feel like to believe this was the end. To know that I wouldn't be waking up when I closed my eyes. I'm going to say that's a plus, right? I don't know about you, but I'd prefer never having that feeling." Eve laughed lightly. "That's the thing. You start to change perspective after a century." "I'll keep that in mind." Fade stood up, walked across the color, burst to the door, and pressed it open. "I don't want to rush you, but I have a daughter I need to see, one who's probably worried about me." "Then we should get moving," Eve said as she stood up. "Thank you, by the way. It's been a long time since I've been on the other side of Lode's guns." "The secret is to take them away," Fade said. "He doesn't have much going for him in a fistfight. With luck, we won't see him again." They went out the door and onto the balcony. Fade looked over the railing, down to the pool of water, ready for another fall. This time, Eve didn't have to push him. Fade clambered over the edge, hung there for a minute, his mind still telling them that letting go would mean a quick, squishy demise. And then he fell. Down, the cool air buffeting him, and then catching him a few feet above the swelling pool water. Even if this was his last time, Fade was happy he'd had another chance at it. There was something liberating in plummeting through the air, putting all you have, all you are, in the hands of something else. Eve came down behind them, and together the two of them went out into the courtyard. "Why did you say that?" Fade said. "About Lode?" "I'm hoping, but I don't believe it," Eve said. "If he's not back here already, then Veronica still has his badge. Maybe it will stay that way." "But isn't he your partner?" "Not anymore. Not after we talked to the gardener." "Then you'll be the only one?" Eve didn't answer, and it took Fade a second to see why. A spidery creature was coming up to them, its legs clattering together rapidly. To his surprise, Fade understood what the creature was saying. "Eve, you've come back at the worst time. Minutes too late," the spider thing said, and continued. "There was another human here, an older man. He was not so nice as the girl from before. JC. JC, Fade said, and the spider thing looked at them. "Pleasure to meet you. I am Sassix. I met JC not long ago. She was very nice, for a human." "Sassix," Eve said. "What happened to the other man? Who was he?" "You'll have to ask the gardener. He sent the man away." Eve glanced at Fade. "That's not good." "What you mean? What did the gardener do?" "It's very protective," Sassix said. "Only so many allowed from any world here. At least, for now. When the number is exceeded, well, it gets messy. And you had a lot of humans come through here recently." I think he became impatient. Eve thanked Sussex and Fade walked with her past the tables and the wide range of strange creatures, feasting at them. The plant from before, Arlo, was nowhere to be seen. Plenty of others, strange and colorful, had replaced it. They approached the large orb with its looping strands of metal, and as they did, they began to swirl. The black and white shifted and spat out towards them, forming into the same metallic man that had been there before, the gardener in human form. You have returned without load. I presume that means he has been dealt with? As much as you can deal with a raker, Eve said. I need you to strip him, shut down his core. Load lost the right. You are certain? It is no small thing to disown a raker. I'm certain. Whatever promise Load once held, he's lost it. He tried to kill me, he tried to kill Fade, and he's causing more chaos than helping. I don't see a way to bring him back. Then as a senior raker for Earth, I grant you your right. It will be done, the gardener said. Of course, such an act will not kill the man. You will need to pull the trigger. I can handle that. Eve put her hand on Fade's shoulder. And he will help. You are down 2 rakers, the gardener said. The pressure might drive you to a hasty decision. Are you sure he is the correct choice? Wait, Fade interrupted. What's going on? The gardener looked at him in the same way that a teacher might look at a student asking a simple question, or a parent at a child who states the obvious. Eve believes you will make a good raker, a guardian of humanity's progress, willing to do what is necessary to ensure the growth of your civilization, regardless of what that it requires. Fade stared at Eve. You didn't tell me about this? When Anatole first drafted me, he didn't tell me either. Instead, when I stood here in the same spot you now stand, he told me that to say yes would mean everything. It would mean giving up what you have today and trading it for an endless lifetime of difficult decisions, of trauma, danger, and hope. Whether or not they know it, the rest of humanity depends on us. I think you have the temperament, Fade. Think you have the skills and the tenacity to see this through. I would be happy with you by my side as a raker. There was a decision there, a choice to go back, to say no and hope that he could return to his house. To nights beating up thugs in restaurants, kidnapping people for ransom money, and eventually waving JC off to college before inevitably picking the wrong contract and winding up dead in the street. Or he could do something more. Actually, it wasn't a hard choice at all. Chapter 61. Same problems, same solutions. Thalia flipped the switch on the machine and, as the familiar burble kicked off, looked over JC sprawled out on her side, phone in front of her face. Texting someone, the clock edged towards 11. An hour till midnight, and here she was, brewing coffee. No word? Thalia asked the girl. Nothing, JC said. I even had a friend go by the house. Only caution tape, no lights. We would have heard by now if he'd been taken by the police, Thalia said. The whole phone call thing. She saw JC nod. The brewer fizzled out a minute later, beeped to say that the brew was done. The coffee was harsh stuff, like rancid chocolate that had been held over a blowtorch. Thalia didn't drink coffee for the taste. She drank it to keep awake, and this did the job well. She set the mug on her counter, one that wrapped L-shaped around the small kitchen full of appliances, at least a decade out of date. A TV sat against the far wall in front of the couch. On but muted. A rebroadcast of the day's sports. Soothing to watch the games play out. Less dangerous than her own. They had gone into that mess to rescue Fade, and it wasn't clear if they had succeeded. Uncertain if risking their lives been worth it. Thalia had plenty of messages on her phone from her uncle. He'd found it beneficial. They'd come in, knocked out their rivals, and left before the police could form any kind of barricade. Now he was telling her about all the new business, thanking her for the idea. Nothing like facilitating a wild gunfight. The knock scared both of them. Thalia spilled some coffee on the counter, cursed, and while she was wiping it up, JC ran over, opened the door. Fade, holding a duffel bag and wearing a tired smile, stood on the other side. JC didn't do anything other than jump into her father's arms. wrap him in a hug. Talia gave them space, moved out of Fade's sightline for a moment, and let them have this little reunion. Eventually, though, JC stepped back and let Fade come into the apartment. Talia, Fade said, thank you, not just for letting us stay here, but for coming to get me. Trust me, Thalia said. You're a good investment. Fade laughed. You won't believe what happened. I don't know if you noticed, but we've been through a lot of weird stuff lately. Right now, I probably would believe anything you told me. Fade looked at her, then at JC. Took a breath. Eve asked me to be one of her partners. A raker. Like the cowboy? Load? JC said the name the way you noted a hated enemy. Spat it out with fire and vinegar. Right, only he's not with her anymore. For all we know, the police have him. Or Veronica killed him. Or they're working together, Thalia said. Fade acknowledged the comment with a shake of his head. So what does that mean, Dad? I don't know yet, Fade said. He took off the jacket, set the bag down, then reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a green jewel with gold around it. But now I've got one of these, and I know how to use it. You can go to the Grove whenever you want, JC said. Whenever I want. I'm supposed to meet Eve there tomorrow. Then Fade let the smile fall off his face, turned to Thalia. I know this probably isn't great news for you, but I'm joining them. Fade held the look, but Thalia could sense the conversation changing. We need another raker. If I can convince her, I think you'd be welcome. Thanks for the offer, Fade, Thalia said. But I can't. You can't? It was my uncle's men, his teams that shot up the compound, Thalia said. They came to back me up. They came for a price. You're not. I have to, at least for a while, Thalia said. Just saying the words took a lot out of her. Going back to life she tried to leave behind. What are you two talking about? JC asked. I'm going to go work for my uncle, Thalia said. That was the deal. For how long? Fade said. Thalia shrugged. You know, if you became a raker, none of this would matter. He couldn't hold it over you. Fade, you even know what a raker gets paid? How are you going to fix your house? Who's going to take care of JC? Thalia waved her arms at her own apartment. My uncle might be a bad bet, but I won't have to worry. Fade started to say something, then reverted to a nod. Glanced at his daughter. Come on, kid, I'm exhausted. How about we get ready for bed and cash out? If I recall correctly, you ought to be in school tomorrow. Avoiding the problem. Classic Fade. But when Thalia turned out her own light that night, she stared at the dark, fighting off memories and the nightmares that came with them. She'd killed for money before, and now she'd do it again. Her own promises be damned. Chapter 62. First day. The next morning, Fade's alarm went off before the sun had topped the mountains to the east. Purple glows floated through the windows as markers of dawn. He rose from the couch, JC still passed out on the other side of the bed, changed into the clothes he'd bought the night before, and set on a pot of coffee. Over the next hour, the other two rose, mimicked his routine. Everything was normal. Fade dropped JC off at school. Talia's apartment was in a different part of town, well away from the girls' bus route. They talked about the weather, about the classes JC would be having that day, an exercise in deliberate avoidance. Fade drove by his own house, caution tape over the front window and door, pulled in the driveway and went inside. By some miracle, or perhaps scared away by all the bullet holes, they hadn't yet been robbed. He picked his way through the rubble. He'd be making calls today. Contractors, repair the walls, repair everything. He'd have to talk to Eve about that salary. His bed, though, that was still there. Still made since that morning. No bullets in here. No shattered glass. He laid down on the comforter, pulled the green jewel out of his pocket, and dangled it in front of his face. His new commute, right here. With one hand he gripped badge, concentrated and pressed his thumb against the bottom part. Going to the Grove the first time had happened too fast to feel. Too out of nowhere to understand. Now, though, Fade caught the shift, the blinding blink away of the house and appearance of the tower. The silvery room. Fade followed the sparks to the door, tossed himself over the balcony, and made his way across the crowded courtyard to the table where Eve stood. Rakers of all sorts of species were lining up in front of the orb, walking through it to worlds unknown. Eve looked up at Fade and gave him a welcoming smile. "Did you make the rookie mistake?" Eve asked him as Fade walked up. "Rookie mistake? Use the badge from home?" Fade nodded. "It's one way, remember," Eve said. "You'll want to park next time, near one of the places the audience can send us." "Ah, yeah, didn't do that," Eve laughed. "It was worse back when there weren't cars or taxis." Fade looked at the table. The audience had the glowing grid up. One in particular flared brighter than the others. Eve pointed to it. "Our next target